Hello everyone. So you should have your notes on the 3 different types of linear functions and the forms that you'll see them in. So we're just going to do a little bit more work with different things that you could see and different problems you can have. So we're actually going to start down here at the bottom and just talk about slope for a little bit. So slope formula is the change in the y values over the change in the x values is one way to think about it. That little triangle is the delta symbol, which means change in y over change in x. Or you might have seen before, it's the y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. It doesn't matter what you label x1 and y1, x2 and y2, as long as you're consistent when you label. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at how we find slope algebraically and then how we go and find slope graphically. So for starters, we're going to look at finding the slope of the line shown. And again, I'm going to remind you that slope is the change in y value over the change in x value. So we're going to look at identifying a couple points. So I like to find ones that go like evenly through the boxes. So if we look at the change in y value, we're going down 1, and then we're going to the right 2. So we're going to say the change in y was negative 1, and the change in x was 2. So the slope is equal to negative 1/2, which a lot of times they use m to write. I'm also going to use this problem to write in slope-intercept form. So we have the slope is negative 1/2. I want to note that the y-intercept here is negative 1. So if we were going to write this in slope-intercept form, which we said was that y equals mx plus b, we can just take the two pieces and put them together. So we have y equals m, which we just said was negative 1/2, x, and then plus b, which would be plus that negative 1, so we can just put minus 1 if we were asked to write the equation of a line. Similarly, we're going to look at another problem finding the slope, but this time I'm given 2 points without the graph. So you could always plot the graph and you could do it the same way as the other. I'll make a note here what we're doing. We are looking to find the slope. So again, I'm going to pick one of these points and call it 1. So I'll pick the first one and call it my x1 and my y1. And my second point, I'll call my x2 and my y2. And then we're going to plug in algebraically to our slope formula. So we said we're going to take y2, which is 2, minus y1, which is negative 5. Notice I put those parentheses before I put the negative number. And then we have x2, which is 1, minus x1, which is 3. That double negative in the numerator is actually going to make it a positive, so we end up with 2 plus 5. 1 minus 3 in the denominator is negative 2. So final answer is going to be negative 7/2, which again is the slope. So now we're going to come up to the top. I kind of like to jump around a little bit. And we're just going to write an equation for each line. So we'll start with this one. Write the equation of a line through each point. Use slope-intercept form. So my reminder, slope-intercept form is the y equals mx plus b. So look at slope-intercept form. We're given a point 3, 1, and we're given that it is perpendicular to negative 4x plus y minus 1 is equal to 0. So before we work this problem, let's go down and let's talk about perpendicular and parallel lines a little bit. So we have a couple different options. The first thing we could have is parallel lines. So here's my reminder. The formula for parallel is that double line. And parallel lines have the same slopes, or the same slope. So if the slope of one line is 1/2, then the slope of the second line would be 1/2. Okay, so that's parallel lines. And then we can talk about perpendicular lines. So perpendicular, the symbol for perpendicular, is like that upside down T. And the slopes of perpendicular are opposite reciprocals. So that word reciprocal means that we're going to take the fraction and we are going to flip it. So for my people who need numerical examples, if I know that one of the slopes is -2/3, the perpendicular slope is going to be +3/2. Right, so it's going to be the opposite, meaning the sign changes, and reciprocal meaning, excuse me, that the fraction is going to flip. So with that kind of in the back of our mind, let's go back up to our problem, talk about how we would go about this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to note the slope of the line that's given to us. And sometimes it'll be easier to find than others. So we're going to start with -4x plus y minus 1 is equal to 0. And we're looking to find that slope. Now there are a couple different things you probably could do. I like to write it in slope-intercept form because then I feel like the slope is pretty easy to find. So I'm going to isolate y. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. I'm also going to add 4x to both sides. So then I have y equals 4x plus 1. And in doing that, I'm able to see that m, or the slope, is equal to 4. So I'm going to say the slope of the line given is equal to 4. And if it helps for the purpose of what we're going to do later, we can write this as 4/1. So once we identify the slope of the line given, the second thing I'm going to do, whether you write it or you kind of do it in your head, is find the perpendicular slope. Remember that upside down T is the symbol for perpendicular. So I'm looking now to find the perpendicular slope, which we said we're going to flip the fraction and make it 1/4, and then use the opposite, so it's going to be -1/4. And once we identify the perpendicular slope, the third thing that we're going to do, since we now know a point and a slope, we're going to use point slope form. And I'm going to emphasize again, the reason I'm starting in point slope form, even though they want slope intercept form, is because of what I'm given. I'm given a point, I now have a slope, so we're going to use point slope form. A reminder, point slope form is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. So again, my x1 and my y1 are coming from this 3, 1. So we have y minus the y value, which is 1, is equal to m, which we just said was -1/4, times x minus the x value, which is 3. So if the directions just said write an equation of a line, we would be done here. But it then specifically wants it in slope-intercept form. So the last thing we're going to do is distribute the m and move the y. So I'm going to say distribute the m and move that y1. And then we should have it y equals. So here's what that looks like. I'm going to write y minus 1 equals, I'm going to distribute that -1/4 through, so it becomes -1/4 x plus 3/4. And then lastly, we're going to add 1 to both sides. So when we add 1 to both sides, we get a final answer of y equals -1/4 x plus, you could write this as 7/4, or you could just go ahead and leave it as 1 3/4. Alright, so moving on to the next one. This one's a pretty quick one. Write an equation for each line. I'm telling you that the m is equal to 0. And I am telling you that the y-intercept is equal to -4. So what that means is that the slope is 0. And the b is -4. So just a reminder, we know the slope, we know the y-intercept, so we can use slope-intercept form because it doesn't say. So we have y equals mx plus b. So y equals 0x minus 4. And really that 0x isn't necessary, so my best answer is just y equals -4. Alright, so a couple more here. Write an equation of each line in standard form with integer coefficients. So let's talk about what that means. Starting with standard form. So standard form was some ax plus by is equal to c, which means that we want to get x's and y's on the same side of the equation. So right now I have y equals -3/2 x minus 1/4. So for starters, I'm going to take this -3/2 x, I'm going to add it to the other side. So we end up with 3/2 x plus y is equal to -1/4. So the second part of this problem asks for integer coefficients. So integer coefficients means that there are no fractions or no decimals. We want whole numbers here. So no fraction, no decimal is one way to think about it. So we need to get rid of the denominator here. We want the smallest number that both of these can go into, both of the denominators. So we have the number 2, we have the number 4. So we are going to find the LCM to be 4 because 2 and 4 both go evenly into 4. We're going to take that LCM, which is 4, and we're going to multiply by 4. So here's what that looks like. We're going to take 4 times 3/2 x plus y is equal to -1/4. And we're going to distribute that 4 all the way through. So when we multiply by 3/2, 4 times 3 is 12, divided by 2 gives me 6x. 4 times y is 4y, equals 4 times -1/4, or 4 divided by 4. It's going to give us 1, and then we keep that negative. So two parts of the directions. Standard form, we get x's and y's on the same side. Integer coefficients means we get rid of any fractions or decimals by multiplying, usually through by something. So last one on the page, and then I'm going to just do one quick graph reminder for you. This one says write in point and slope form, and I'm giving you 2 points. Okay, so point and slope form, we need 2 things. So I'm just going to note we need a point and we need a slope. So we're given the 0.07 and we're given the 0.35. So I'm going to note that the point is given to us. We actually have 2 choices, right? We can use either one. The slope is something that we can find. So we're going to use what we did below to then find the slope. So I'm going to come and say, okay, to find the slope, we're going to look at our change in y values over our change in x values. So we have 5 minus 7, those are my y values, over 3 minus 0. that gives me a slope of negative 2/3, which I can use in. So now we have everything we need. We have a point and a slope. So we can write our final answer. We can actually use either point, so I'm going to show both. Remind you that point slope form is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. So we could use our first point, which would be y minus 7 equals negative 2/3 times x minus 0, or just x, because we don't really need the minus 0. Or we could use the other point, and it would look like y minus 5 is equal to negative 2/3 times x minus 3. Alright, so that's what I have on this page. I'm going to do one more thing and just remind you, because I don't remember if it's on the other page of notes or not. So the last thing that I want to note here is just a couple quick graphs. So if I asked you to graph x equals 5, and then I want to talk about y equals 5 and the difference. So x equals 5, you're going to go to the x-axis, and you're going to find 5. So we need a line that only goes through that x value, which means it's going to be a vertical line. So x equals is going to be vertical. If we have y equals 5, we're going to go to the y-axis and find 5. And so we're going to draw a line that only has 5 as its y value, which means it's going to be a horizontal line. So then the last thing to kind of note here is the slopes, which again, this may be redundant, I just can't remember, so I'll go ahead and address it. Vertical lines have undefined slope. Horizontal lines have a slope of 0, or 0 slope. So just something to kind of keep in mind as you get ready to graph. So your homework on this is going to be in Math Excel, using what we did today in class along with this. I hope you all are able to do it. Just let me know if you have questions, and I will see you next class.